hey, head on over to Amazon and buy your copy of Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD by me, Sarah Westbrook. Our very first episode, I wrote down, Mason, when we were listening to it, this is so long and boring.
You said it out loud, too, apparently.
I did. I said it out loud. Mostly because we talked a little bit about our stories and what led us to this. And I'm sure for somebody who's
So our story was boring?
Well, it was for me, mostly because I've told it so much recently and pieces of it. I was like, I don't want to listen to this. But hopefully for the listener, they enjoyed getting to know us a little bit. And so I thought that let's start today with a then and now. So Mason, how about you?
I got to start the then and now?
Well, I put you on our list. See, you're first.
I'm first?
And I'm second, probably because I have more to say.
I guarantee it.
Well, yeah. Yep. Yep, that's me.
So it's interesting listening to that episode again because as we're describing ourselves, one of the first things I said about myself is I'm still an active member of the church, still involved, still believing. And for those of you that have listened to the rest of our podcast, you'll see that that's not the case anymore. That's been a really hard transition. It's actually been fairly recent, but it's been difficult. It's also been just kind of a product of where I am. I was talking with a friend this morning actually on text, and she had asked about how am I feeling about leaving the church and about the fact that your book is out because, of course, there's lots of vulnerability in there.
Yeah. Well, and she read the book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's read it,
book,
and she's left a review on Goodreads.
Yeah. There's lots of vulnerability in there, and, of course, she'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's like I'm so busy and so overwhelmed right now that in some ways not being involved in the church is actually just kind of a relief. It's one less thing I have to focus on, one less thing I have to worry about. Right.
So for our audience, our youngest son was just diagnosed with autism.
And not too long ago, our youngest daughter was donated. We've known for a while.
We've known about Abby's
autism. She was officially diagnosed with autism just a couple of weeks ago, too.
But our youngest son almost burned our house down 3 times in the last couple of weeks. Not because he's trying to kill us, but just because of curiosity and an inability to really connect cause and effect. And so that was just really shocking. So yeah, our family we've been in the trenches a little bit over the last, I'm going to say July was just a rough month for the Westbrook
for the last
family.
2 or 3 weeks now, you've been struggling a lot more with your MS, and that leaves more for me to pick up and do, and so it's been overwhelming. The last several months, last year has been quite overwhelming. And so not being involved in a church is in some ways a relief. In some ways, I still miss it. I certainly miss the community. I miss just being involved. There's a lot of fulfillment that can come from that. And so I struggle with that still a little bit. But not too much simply because of just the overwhelm. There's not much time to focus on it and worry about it. But so that's where I am. So now I'm out. There's, a couple things along the way that just kind of really sealed the deal for me. There's a lot of things that we've talked about, a lot of things that we've listened to, and a couple things that sealed the deal. And so now here I am. I'm out, and that's the bulk of my story, I guess, right there.
Okay. So what would you say, or you said a few, would you say 2, 3, 7? What are like the top 2 reasons that really sealed the deal for you?
One of the big things is the lack of accountability from leadership. They tend to want to hide things, or they don't talk about them until someone else kind of forces their hand. They don't talk about them. So there's a lack of accountability, which I really struggle with because I really struggle with that in general. I struggle with myself, with my children, with my family, other people. Like I struggle if you're not willing to take accountability for what's going on in your life, mostly because you can't improve, you can't grow from the struggles that you're having if you don't acknowledge that they exist.
Right.
And so I really struggle with that. I think that was probably the number one, is just the inability to take accountability for what's going on. kind of adjacent to that, there's some lying going on as well too, and I think that's just kind of it's kind of its own thing, but a lot of it is going along with just not being able to be accountable for things.
Are you talking about the
From
leaders
the
are
leadership of the church.
lying
Yeah, from the leadership
to the members? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that. I think that's the biggest thing. There's lots of other things that are going on too, but they're, in my mind, not as big of a deal. More minor. I could probably deal with them, or could have probably dealt with them, and maybe even in the future could deal with those things if there was full accountability for what has happened, what's going on, the things that have happened. So, yeah, there's lots of other little things, but mostly it comes down to the inability of church leadership to be accountable for just everything, for their history mostly.
Yeah. I feel like the thing, like the straw that broke the camel's back, was watching them be dishonest about the SEC fines. And we purposefully were hiding this for these reasons. And I felt like that was kind of the turning point for you. Is that accurate? Or, because I mean, we've sort of talked about it privately, but we haven't really delved into it because, once again, our time alone has been very limited over the last several months.
Right. We haven't really delved into it too much.
Yeah, we haven't talked. We're not speaking right
that's
now.
That's not true. I think that was a very clear and present example in my own life right now of that tendency. And so if you look back historically and you see these things, and then you talk about, like, for instance, Joseph Fielding Smith and hiding the earliest account of the first vision, and then just putting it back in and not talking about the fact that had happened or why. Like, if he had just come out then and said, look, I hid this, that was probably a bad idea. Let me explain why. I hid this. I was concerned. I didn't really know what to do with this at the time, and I'm concerned that this might pull people, might make you doubt your faith and doubt your belief in what I believe is God's church, blah, blah, blah. If he had done that, then I think that there would be no conversation about it at all right now. This is, 50, 60 years later. But there wasn't any of that. But that was in the 1960s. Then you talk about the end of racism, the end of the ban on the priesthood
ban. Racism is
not
still
really
very
the end
alive.
of racism, but that's kind of what the church considers, quote unquote, the end of racism in the church. Oh, well, we gave everybody everything, so racism is over, which isn't really true. But that's kind of the way the church looks at it. The end of racism, 1978. Those are all still just kind of distant things for me. They have some applicability into my daily life, but they're distant. And so then you get further and further closer to where we are. And that, of course, the SEC, and the way that the church handled the SEC and the abuse, child abuse, molestation, things that are going on, those are very real and poignant to me right now as issues that continue. And so the SEC thing was just kind of that, here it is, right now, here's a modern example that in reality, for church members, in 2-3 years, it will have faded away to nothing. If nothing else happens, It will have faded away to nothing. Most members will either not even know about it or not care about it, not even remember that it happened. And the church wins on that. There's no talk about it. This discussion is over. They win. And so that's kind of that issue, is that it's a...
Right,
it's
you were almost like, leaders, please show up and stand up and say, hey, we got advised to do it this way. We chose not to do that. We take accountability for making a choice that compromised our integrity. We are doing everything we can to fix it. Let's move forward. Like, they signed the letter in the SEC stuff saying this was purposefully done. This was an intentional dishonesty thing, and the reason was this. But then, so they signed that, and then they came back and they're like, oh, well, we took the advice of the people who represented us. It wasn't really our fault. We're going to shift the blame to somebody else. And so, like, on paper, they said one thing, but then what they're saying with their words, it just didn't match.
Yeah.
And that was really aggravating.
One final piece to that I think is kind of applicable. We just finished the cult series where we spent 11 episodes talking about cultism and aspects of cultism. And so as I look at that example of the SCC letter, and I look at the way that we're responding, the ex-Mormon community responds, kind of up in an uproar about it. And there's been a lot of members that have left over this as well. But then I look at the way that my family responds to this issue, and it's almost like they just don't care at all. And I see a lot of that cult mentality that we've talked about being there, and almost, it almost feels like the cult mentality has completely prevented them from seeing it from a different perspective. And that's scary to me. It's scary because I've been in that situation. There's a lot of loss and just like angst over the fact that how could I be a part of this for so long and not even recognize it? But then I look at my life and the way that things are taught, and I get exactly why I could be part of it for so long. So seeing people that I care about that are still so unable to just view the material.